How to Sew the Bottle Tote, part of the gift bag collection. Available in 4 beautiful Christmas designs for you to choose from. Wrap your presents in style with this collection of 4 beautiful bags in a range of sizes and shapes. Cutting out. Cut around all the bottle tote outer pieces from your fabric panel. You'll have the front, the back, 2 side pieces and the base, as well as 2 handles. Now, to cut the lining pieces for these, you need to use some fabric from your stash. So use the fabric pieces that you've just cut out as templates to cut around and make pieces exactly the same from your chosen lining fabric. You'll need to cut out a bottle tote lining front, lining back, lining side, 2 pieces of those, and a lining base. Just use them as templates and cut round them so you can line your bottle tote in whatever fabric you like. Now, to add a little padding to your bottle tote, you don't have to do this, but it does make it extra structured. Press the outer pieces, the front, back, sides and the base onto wadding, and then trim it all the way around the edge. If you've got fusible wadding, press in place. If not, tack in place. Making the tote outer. Take the bottle tote outer front and the bottle tote outer side and place them right sides facing, so you're matching the long edge. You're matching the right side of the front edge and the left side of the side edge. Now pin them together so that the raw long edges meet and the top and the bottom edges meet. Now, in order to get your outer to fit around the base neatly, you need to stop stitching 1/4 inch from the bottom. So if you measure and mark 1/4 inch from the bottom with the pin, then you'll know where to stop stitching. Start stitching right at the top though, and stitch all the way down until you reach that pin and reverse stitch. And it will look like this. Once that's done, press the seam open, then take the bottle tote outer back and place that right sides facing on top of the other side of the bottle tote outer side. Again, match the top edge and the long raw edges and pin together, then pin together at the bottom, making sure all the raw edges match, and pop a couple of pins along the centre just to hold those raw edges together. Again, you need to stop stitching 1/4 inch before the end, so mark that measurement with a pin, and that's where you need to stop stitching. So stitch that together all the way down to the 1/4 inch mark. Once that's done, take the other side piece, pin that into place, in the same way, keep pinning it all the way along the edge. Just move the pieces together so that the raw edges are matching. Measure and mark the 1/4 inch position. And then sew that one together from the top all the way down to the pin mark. And then when you've sewn that one, you can then join the whole lot together into one tube by joining the other side of the front to the other side of the side. You can pin all of these and then sew them in one go, or you can pin and sew, depending on how you prefer to work. Again, don't forget to measure and mark the 1/4 inch mark so you remember where to stop. And then sew that one together. Once that's done, you've then got a tube that's all joined together. The front and the back are slightly bigger than the side pieces. You'll notice that, but that's done intentionally. Now take the bottle tote outer base and you're going to sew this along the bottom edge, and that's the edge where you've left the 1/4 inch seams unstitched. Put the top of the bottle tote outer base along the bottom edge of the front. Now open out those seam allowances and then pin to the edge of the base. So where the opened out edge of the seam allowance is, that will meet up with the corner of the base piece. It's a bit harder to see here because of all the wadding, but if you open it all out, you will see that that's how it fits. So I open out that flat and then pin it into place. And then pop a pin between just to make sure that the raw edges are matching. Now stitch from the seam, so just where the seam is, so that'll be 1/4 of an inch in from the edge. You might find it easier to pin those seam allowances open. So start from the seam, stitch all the way along, but stop stitching right on top of the seam. Don't work all the way to the edge. Don't work over the seam allowance for the next piece. Just stop on that seam. Reverse stitch, and once it's done, take it out from under your machine, and then you can pin the next side into place. It's much easier to pin and sew and then take it out from the machine to put the next in place. Now with the wadding and making it a little bit bulky, I found it's easier if you pin the seam allowances open first, because then they're held flat and you can see what you're doing easier. Take the other side, the next side of the base, and start by pinning the far end so you can see where the open seam allowance meets the corner of the base piece. Pin that into place, and then just to making sure that those seam allowances are staying flat, pin the next piece. Now if you just take out that pin that you put in earlier, when you open out this piece, you can see that because you've left that 1/4 of an inch seam unstitched, you're forming a nice right-hand corner there, and there's a little square left on the base. This is what gives you the neat, square, crisp edges. So stitch it together all the way from there, but again, stop stitching and reverse stitch on that seam. Now all you need to do is sew the other sides in place in exactly the same way. Then you have the whole of the base attached nice and neatly. If you turn the whole outer right sides out, push your fingers in to push out those corners so you can see it's nice and neat. And you might find it easier if you roll the seams to the edge and give it a little press. It will just give it the crisp corners, and it's easier to do that at this stage. So that's the outer finished. Now you need to assemble the lining. The lining is made in exactly the same way as the outer. So you've got a lining front, lining back, and 2 lining sides. Don't get them mixed up because the sides are slightly smaller than the front and back. If you've labelled them when you cut it out, it will be easier, but if not, just remember the sides are slightly narrower. Pin in the front to one side at the top and bottom. Again, don't forget to measure and mark the 1/4 of an inch from the bottom, and then stitch together all the way from the top to the bottom. Now you do need to leave a turning gap in one of the sides, so I'm going to do that in the first one I've joined together. If you fold it in half to find the centre point, then open it out. Then measure 2 inches either side of that. That will leave a 4-inch gap. You can leave this gap in any of the pieces, but I'm doing it in the first one so I don't forget. Place vertical pins so that you remember that's the turning gap, and then you stitch from the top to the turning gap, leave that bit unstitched, then stitch from the bottom of the turning gap and stop stitching a 1/4 of an inch from the bottom. If you do it in the first piece, then it's finished. Just make sure it's in the centre. Now join all of the other pieces together in the same way. Again, always starting at the top and leaving the 1/4 of an inch turning gap, but the 1/4 of an inch unstitched at the bottom. When they're all joined together into a tube, sew the base on in exactly the same way as you made the outer. So here's the lining finished. You can see there's the turning gap and the base is attached neatly using the same method as with the outer. So there's the outer and the lining all finished. Attaching the handles. Take one bottle tote handle and fold it in half lengthways with right sides facing. Pin together, making sure all the raw long edges are matching. Then stitch together down the length. I've tacked together across the end and then press the seam open so it lays down the centre of the back. Now turn the handle right sides out. I've used a turning tube for this, so slip the tube inside and then push the stick through, which is why I've tacked the end, because that helps to push the stick through. and then undo those long tacking stitches from the short end just so that the tube handle is open. Once that's all opened out, press it so that the seam lays down the centre of the back edge, then top stitch down either side to neaten and decorate. Once it's top stitched, just trim off the ends because it's easier to put the handle in and neater if you've got a nice straight edge. And then make the other handle in exactly the same way. So you've got two handles. Now take the bottle tote outer and lay it with the front uppermost and measure 1/4 inch in from that side seam and mark it with a pin. Then measure 1/4 inch inwards from the other side seam and mark that with a pin. This is where the outer edges of the handles are going to go. Take one of the handles and measure 1/4 inch down from the top. This is because the handle is going to extend 1/4 inch above the top of the bag because it makes the handles more secure, as they're less likely to be pulled out when you're carrying it. Now take that handle and place it on the front. Place it right sides down so that it extends 1/4 inch above the raw edge of the front, which is where you've placed the pin, and the outer edge matches up with the pin so that it's 1/4 inch in from the seam. Pin it together at the top, and then just to make sure it stays straight during assembly, pin it together a little bit further down, making sure that the top and bottom edge are 1/4 inch. Take the other end of the handle, making sure that it stays straight, loop it round and pin that one into place so that it's 1/4 inch in from the side seam and it extends 1/4 inch above the top raw edge of the bag outer. Now you can tack it into place across the top and a little bit further down. Then take the other handle, measure, mark and pin, and then attach it to the outer back in exactly the same way. Put the extra line of tacking stitches below. These will be removed later, but it will just keep it straight during assembly. Assembling the tote. Place the assembled bottle tote outer inside the bottle tote lining so that they're right sides facing. Once you've pushed it right inside, make sure the handles are tucked inside so they don't get caught in this seam. Now match up all the side seams. Remember the front and back are slightly bigger than the sides, so make sure you join up the correct seams. So join up the front outer seam that joins to the side with the front outer lining that joins to the side lining. You'll soon see if you've got them round the wrong way because they won't match up. But just have a check because they are slightly bigger, the fronts and backs, than the sides. So match up the seams, making sure that the two seams sit directly on top of each other. And then it will all match up better and look neater too. As you work your way around, just check that those handles are tucked inside. Because you've added that extra layer of tacking stitches to the handles, it should just keep them inside. Adjust it so that those seam allowances are open and flat. It's a little easier with the lining, but with the wadding that's in the outer, you just need to adjust them to make sure they're flat. It will just give you a less bulky edge. So pin it together at all four seams. And then once that's done, you can pin it together between the seams just to keep those, make sure those raw edges are matching up. And then once you've pinned it all the way around the top, you can see the ends of the handles are extended beyond the seam. Sew it together all the way round. Once that's done, you can see I've pressed the lining side over a bit just to help the seam to lay flat. Put your hand inside and pull the lining, the outer, out of the lining. Then find the turning gap that you left in the lining. Put your hand inside it, go all the way to the bottom of the outer, grab hold of the base and pull it right sides out through the gap in the lining. so that the whole thing, the outer and the lining, are right sides out. Then put your hand back inside the lining and push out the base so that the corners are all out. It's easier to do this whilst you've still got the gap in the lining. Now we need to close the lining, so fold the edges of the turning gap to the inside and pin them together. Just in a couple of places, just to hold it. So make sure the turning gap is turned under. It'll be about 1/4 inch because that's the same as the seam allowance. And then top stitch the turning gap closed by machine, or you can slip stitch it by hand. Once you've done that and it's nice and closed, you need to remove the extra row of tacking stitches that you put into the handles. These are the ones that help to keep it straight during assembly. If you've worked nice long tacking stitches by machine like I've done, I use the longest stitch on my machine, they're really easy to take out. You just need to cut them with a seam ripper maybe in a couple of places and they'll come out quite easily. When you work these tacking stitches, never do a reverse stitch, just work them so they can come out easily. They're only a temporary hold. Pull out all the loose threads as well. Then once all the tacking stitches are gone, you now need to push the lining inside the outer. So put your hand inside and make sure that the bottom of the lining, so the base section, is sitting right on the base section of the outer, so it's pushed right inside. Now then, work round the edge, making sure that the seam that joined the lining to the outer is sitting right on the top edge. If you fold it under with your fingers first, just to make sure it's right inside, give it a little press as well. Making sure the handles are facing upwards, top stitch all the way around the top of the bag. This will neaten the edge, but also hold the lining inside as well. Now your bottle tote is finished. So it's ready to pop a bottle inside and to give to someone as a really extra special gift.